In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction, and we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them.
All right, let's talk about what is actually happening in the world right now, because if you are only reading the headlines, you are missing the full picture. And the full picture is genuinely alarming. We have a war in the Middle East that is not just a regional conflict anymore. We have the world's two largest economies on a collision course over that war. We have the most important waterway for global energy sitting strangled in the Persian Gulf. We have North Korea repositioning itself diplomatically like a chess piece on a board. And we have ordinary people in countries that have absolutely nothing to do with any of these decisions paying for all of it at the pump, at the grocery store, and at the gas cylinder. So let me break this down properly, because you deserve an honest, thorough analysis of what is going on. Before we get into it, if you are new here, please subscribe and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this content reach people who need it, and right now more people need to understand what is happening in the world. Share this with someone who you think needs to hear it. Now let us get into it. Let's start with the foundational event, because everything else flows from it. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated military strikes against Iran. That is the starting gun for everything we are going to talk about today. And before we even get to what is happening now, we have to understand how we got here, because this did not come out of nowhere. For years, the United States pursued what it called a maximum pressure strategy against Iran. The original Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, was negotiated in 2015 under the Obama administration. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear enrichment activities in exchange for sanctions relief. The deal was working. International inspectors confirmed Iran's compliance, and then in 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the deal unilaterally, reimposed sanctions, and sent Iran's economy into freefall. The Biden administration largely kept those sanctions in place. By December 2025, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was publicly celebrating the collapse of Iran's currency as the grand culmination of that maximum pressure campaign. Think about that for a second. A senior American official was publicly celebrating an entire nation's economic destruction as a policy win. When Trump returned to office and stood before Congress at his State of the Union address on February 24, 2026, he claimed that Iran had restarted its nuclear program and was developing missiles capable of striking the United States. What he conveniently left out is that his own intelligence community's report said Iran did not pose any military threat toward the United States and would need until 2035 to build such missiles, even if it wanted to. 4 days after that speech, American and Israeli bombs were falling on Iran. Now, the first major consequence of those strikes was something the Joint Chiefs of Staff had explicitly warned Trump about in briefings before the attack. They told him that striking Iran would likely prompt Tehran to close the Strait of Hormuz. Trump dismissed those warnings. He told his team Iran would capitulate instead. They were wrong. On March 2, 2026, a senior official in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially confirmed that the Strait of Hormuz was closed. And with that announcement, the entire world felt the shockwave. Let me explain why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much to people who have never heard of it before. It is a narrow sea passage just 21 nautical miles across at its narrowest point, sitting between the Arabian Peninsula and Iran, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. Every single day before this war, approximately 20 million barrels of oil passed through that choke point. That is roughly 25% of all seaborne oil trade on the planet. About 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas passes through it as well, most of that coming from Qatar. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have some alternative pipeline routes, but they have a combined capacity of only about 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day. Everyone else, including Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Bahrain, and Qatar, relies entirely on the strait to export their energy. When it closes, the world does not have a backup plan. The International Energy Agency, which is not an alarmist organization, called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market and described it as the greatest threat to global energy security in history. Brent crude surged immediately. It crossed $80 a barrel within days of the war starting. By the time the strait closed on March 4th, oil prices surged past $120 a barrel, and QatarEnergy, the single largest liquefied natural gas producer on the planet, declared force majeure on all of its exports. Gulf countries collectively cut oil production by more than 14 million barrels per day. The Ras Laffan facility in Qatar, the largest LNG liquefaction plant in the world, was knocked offline after being struck on March 2nd. Analysts have warned it could take up to 5 years to repair. And here is where this becomes personal for people outside the region. Gas prices in the United States hit $4 a gallon by March 31st, representing a 30% surge. That is coming out of every working family's pocket. In the Philippines, the government declared a state of national energy emergency on March 24th because that country imports 98% of its oil from the Middle East. In India, liquid petroleum gas, which is the primary cooking fuel for hundreds of millions of households, started running short because 60% of India's LPG demand is met through imports that pass through Hormuz. In Nepal, authorities began refilling only half of empty cylinders to stretch their stockpiles. European airlines started cancelling tens of thousands of flights and warning of jet fuel shortages. And fertilizer prices exploded globally because the Persian Gulf produces around 30 to 35% of the world's urea exports and roughly 20 to 30% of its ammonia. When those supplies get disrupted, that is not just about heating your home. That is about growing food. So that is the economic foundation of what we are living through right now. Now let's talk about the diplomatic chaos that has played out on top of all of it, because it has been extraordinary. Trump at various points claimed the Iranian military had been destroyed, that the strait had already been reopened, and that Iran had called him asking for a ceasefire, all of which Iran flatly denied. On March 9th, he said the war was very complete, pretty much. Iran was still launching missile strikes. On March 24th, he claimed the United States and Israel had won the war. The missiles kept flying. On April 1st, he said Iran had just asked for a ceasefire and promised to consider it once the strait was open, free and clear. Adding the United States would otherwise be blasting Iran into oblivion back to the Stone Ages. Iran's foreign ministry called that claim false and baseless. Through all of this, Pakistan was quietly playing the role of mediator. On April 8th, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire brokered by Pakistan. The ceasefire has been fragile from the start. On April 11th, Vice President J.D. Vance arrived in Islamabad with Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to negotiate directly with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the Speaker of Iran's parliament. By April 12th, Vance had already left Pakistan, announcing that negotiations had not led to an agreement. Trump then announced a full naval blockade of Iranian ports starting April 13th. Iran's foreign minister called the blockade an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Then on April 19th, a United States guided missile destroyer fired at and damaged the Iranian cargo ship MV Tauska in the Gulf of Oman, seizing it. The ship had been on a return voyage from China. It was carrying what the United States described as dual-use equipment. Iran described the seizure as a truce violation. As retaliation, Iran fired drones at United States forces and seized 2 container ships in the strait. Trump then ordered the Navy on April 23rd to destroy any Iranian boats laying mines in the Hormuz. And today, April 24th, Trump declared he is under no pressure to end this war and that the clock is ticking for Iran. Meanwhile, the Lebanon ceasefire, a separate but connected front involving Hezbollah, just got extended by 3 weeks. That is the war. Now let's talk about China, because China is the thread that runs through absolutely everything here. China's relationship with Iran is layered and complicated in ways that American media coverage often flattens into a simple China bad supports Iran narrative. The reality is more interesting and more troubling in different ways than that. China is Iran's largest buyer of crude oil. Iranian crude makes up about 13% of China's total seaborne crude imports. That is a significant supply line, and the war just severed it. China also has a 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Iran signed in 2021, which covers economic, military, and political cooperation. So yes, China and Iran are deeply tied, but what Beijing has actually done during this war tells a more complicated story. China officially declared itself a neutral party. It did not send troops. It did not formally condemn Iran's actions in the Gulf, but it also has not cut off Iran. In March 2026, the United States accused China's state-owned semiconductor company SMIC of providing chip-making tools to Iran's military. The United States-China Economic and Security Review Commission then stated that China's BeiDou navigation satellite system, which is Beijing's answer to GPS, had been used by Iran to direct attacks across the region. That is enormous, if true. Think about what that means. China's satellite infrastructure is being used to guide Iranian missiles and drones against American forces and American allies. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs denied these claims, but denials from a foreign ministry under these circumstances should not be taken at face value by anyone who has been paying attention. Then there is the reconnaissance satellite story, which broke in April when the Financial Times published an investigation based on leaked Iranian military documents. According to those documents, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force secretly acquired a high-resolution Chinese reconnaissance satellite in late 2024. The satellite was built and launched by a company called EarthEye, and it was being used to monitor key sites in the region for military purposes, including to plan strikes. China denied this as well. And then on April 11th, CNN reported that according to United States intelligence sources, China was preparing to ship man-portable air defense systems known as MN-PADS to Iran through third countries. These are shoulder-fired missiles capable of taking down aircraft. Trump responded publicly saying China is going to have big problems if it follows through with weapons shipments. CBS News separately reported that China was considering supplying Iran with X-band radar systems according to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Again, China denied everything. Now here is what is interesting about China's public posture through all of this. Diplomatically, Beijing has been playing peacemaker rather than combatant. China's top diplomat Wang Yi made 26 phone calls between February 28th and the ceasefire on April 8th. China's special envoy to the Middle East held nearly 24 meetings. China and Pakistan jointly put forward a 5-point peace initiative on March 31st, calling for an immediate ceasefire and the restoration of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. China met with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. Xi Jinping called Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, urging the reopening of the strait. The African Union praised the China-Pakistan peace initiative as a timely and constructive contribution. But then on April 7th, China and Russia jointly vetoed a Bahrain-sponsored United Nations Security Council resolution on ship escorting in the Strait of Hormuz. So China publicly calls for the strait to reopen, while simultaneously blocking the international legal mechanism that would authorize escorting ships through it. That is not neutrality. That is calculated maneuvering. China does not want the United States-led international order to manage this crisis. Beijing wants to manage it, or at least to prevent Washington from managing it without Beijing's involvement. And on April 19th, when American forces seized the MV Tuska, that ship was on a return voyage from China carrying dual-use equipment for Iran. The seizure was a direct flashpoint between Washington and Beijing. Whether that equipment was being shipped with the knowledge and approval of the Chinese government is something the US is now investigating. The Trump Sea Summit, which was supposed to take place in Beijing around April, has been postponed. Trump said on March 16th that he was requesting the postponement because we've got a war going on. That summit was seen as the keystone of a trade truce that the two countries had been building since late 2025. Its postponement is not just diplomatic inconvenience. It signals that the war is straining the trade détente that was supposed to be the big story of 2026. And as China's foreign trade law, updated and in effect since March 1st, 2026, now gives Beijing tools to retaliate against foreign companies that drop Chinese suppliers, including through exit bans on staff and asset seizures. The risk of corporate executives in China becoming effective hostages in a geopolitical standoff is now a live policy reality. What China is doing here is something strategic analysts call buying time and building insulation. Beijing is watching the United States burn through weapons stockpiles, diplomatic goodwill, and military readiness on a war in the Middle East. China has already barred the export of rare earth elements for military use in response to United States pressure, and rare earth elements are critical for everything from missiles to fighter jets. If the United States finds itself drawn deeper into the Iran war, its ability to project force in the Indo-Pacific, specifically around Taiwan, is weakened. China is playing a long game, and so far, by staying in the background and presenting itself to the global south as the reasonable, non-interventionist superpower compared to the United States, it is winning the narrative battle, even if its intelligence and supply relationships with Iran continue to bubble under the surface. Now let us talk about North Korea, because this is where the story takes a genuinely interesting diplomatic twist that does not get enough coverage. North Korea and Iran have a relationship that stretches back to the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, when Pyongyang supplied Tehran with weapons. Both countries are on the United States list of state sponsors of terrorism. Both operate under international sanctions for their nuclear programs. They are, in George W. Bush's memorable phrase, fellow members of the axis of evil. For decades, United States officials worried constantly about military and nuclear cooperation between the two countries. But here is what has happened since the war started on February 28th. According to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, there is no sign that North Korea has sent weapons or supplies to Iran since the war began. North Korea's foreign ministry has issued only two muted, toned-down statements about the entire conflict. When Ayatollah Khamenei was killed in United States Israeli strikes, North Korea said essentially nothing. When Khamenei's son Mojtaba was selected as the new supreme leader, China's foreign ministry at least acknowledged it had noted relevant reports. North Korea barely registered it at all. South Korea's intelligence services believe that Kim Jong-un is deliberately distancing North Korea from Iran in hopes of reopening diplomatic channels with the United States. This is a remarkable development. Pyongyang is watching the war and calculating that now, when Trump is looking for wins, when Trump has already demonstrated he is willing to make dramatic unilateral moves, there might be an opening to restart the kind of summit diplomacy that defined Trump's first term. Kim Jong-un showed in 2018 and 2019 that he is willing to meet with Trump, exchange letters, and project a relationship of personal diplomacy. He appears to be creating the conditions to do that again. The previous North Korea visit to Tehran by a senior official was in 2019. The early 2024 visit by External Economic Relations Minister Yoon Jong-ho, who had also just been to Moscow, was seen at the time as potentially alarming because of what it might signal about military cooperation, but that was before the war. Now, in the context of the war, the picture has shifted. North Korea is pulling back from being seen as part of the anti-US coalition that includes Iran, Russia, and, in complicated ways, China. Kim Jong-un apparently wants a seat at a different table. North Korea also has a strong incentive to hedge right now for a different reason. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung recently issued a formal apology to North Korea over a January drone incursion, where South Korean government officials were involved in flying drones over Pyongyang. Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's powerful sister, publicly called Lee's apology very fortunate and wise behavior. That is almost warm language coming from Pyongyang. Inter-Korean relations are thawing slightly, which gives the North even more reason not to blow up any diplomatic momentum by being seen arming a country the United States is currently at war with. So let us pull back and look at the big picture, because this is where I want to give you my honest analysis of where all of this is headed. We have a war that began based on intelligence claims that the United States' own agencies could not fully substantiate. We have a president who was warned by the Joint Chiefs that striking Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz, who dismissed those warnings and was proven wrong within 4 days. We have the largest energy supply disruption in history, now costing the global economy hundreds of billions of dollars every week. We have a ceasefire that is repeatedly violated by both sides, propped up by Pakistan, which itself is under enormous pressure. We have China playing an extraordinarily complex double game, publicly posturing as a peacemaker while apparently allowing its satellite systems, its semiconductor supply chains, and its shipping routes to provide Iran with the tools to sustain its military resistance. We have North Korea quietly repositioning itself for a potential diplomatic opening with Trump, and we have the ordinary people of Iran, the Philippines, India, Nepal, and dozens of other countries paying the bill for all of it. Here is the thing about the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which Trump used extensively in his first term to impose tariffs and sanctions. The United States Supreme Court struck down the IEEPA tariffs on China earlier this year, which is part of why the US and China were having to rebuild their trade relationship through new mechanisms. That legal constraint matters because it tells you that even the most aggressive executive branch has limits placed on it by other institutions. The problem is that no court can stop a war once it has started, no legal mechanism can unclog the Strait of Hormuz, no injunction can undo the strikes on Iran's infrastructure that have killed over 3,600 Iranian civilians so far, according to the United States-based human rights activist news agency. While 13 American service members have been killed and over 415 wounded, the ceasefire right now is deeply fragile. As of today, Trump has extended it at Pakistan's request, but he has given Iran a window of only 3 to 5 days to engage in serious negotiations before American attacks resume. The blockade remains in place. Iran's foreign minister has called the blockade an act of war. Iran seized 2 container ships hours after the latest ceasefire extension was announced. The United States seized an Iranian-linked oil tanker in the Indian Ocean on April 23rd. Both sides are continuing to escalate within the formal framework of a ceasefire, which tells you something important. Neither side trusts the other enough to stand down fully, and neither side has decided it has enough to walk away from the fight. The energy crisis is not going to resolve itself quickly, even if the strait fully reopens tomorrow. The IEA notes that oil flow through Hormuz has fallen from around 20 million barrels per day before the war to just over 2 million barrels per day during the conflict. Even after a ceasefire, restoring shipping insurance confidence, clearing mines that Iran itself admitted it had lost track of, and restarting the logistical pipelines of global energy trade will take months at minimum. The Ras Laffan LNG facility in Qatar could take up to 5 years to repair. 1 billion barrels of oil production will be lost because of this war, according to the CEO of the Vitol commodity trading firm. That loss is already priced into everything you buy, and China is going to be the most important variable in what comes next. If Beijing decides the trade truce with the United States is no longer worth protecting, If Chinese companies are sanctioned heavily for supplying Iran, if the MV Tuska seizure escalates into a broader confrontation over Chinese shipping, then the economic damage to the global economy compounds dramatically. The United States is running a 67-day partial government shutdown right now. Its weapons stockpiles are being depleted by the Iran war, which has already prompted conversations about redeploying air defense systems from South Korea to the Middle East, weakening the deterrent against North Korea in the process. And China has been quietly building its rare earth mineral export restrictions into a leverage tool that it can turn into a weapon against the United States defense industry at a moment of its choosing. I want to be direct with you about something here. The people who made these decisions, the decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal in 2018, the decision to dismiss warnings about closing the strait, the decision to go to war on the basis of intelligence that American agencies themselves disputed, those people are not the ones paying the price. The Filipino family rationing cooking gas is paying the price. The Indian household switching to firewood is paying the price. The European travelers whose flights are being cancelled are paying a small part of the price. And the Iranian civilians whose country has been bombed, more than 3,600 of whom are already dead, are paying the largest price of all. This is not analysis for the sake of outrage. I am not saying any of this to make you angry without purpose. I am saying it because understanding what is actually happening, understanding the chain of decisions that led here, understanding who benefits and who pays, is the only way any of us can make sense of the news cycle that is going to keep delivering headline after headline in the weeks ahead. Because this is not over, the ceasefire is fragile, the summit between Trump and Xi has not happened, China's dual game has not been called, North Korea is watching and waiting, Pakistan is stretched between its mediating role and its own pressures. And the global economy is sitting on an energy crisis that could still get dramatically worse if another escalation cracks the ceasefire open. Stay informed, ask the hard questions. And please, if this kind of analysis is useful to you, share it, subscribe, leave a comment telling me what you want me to dig into next, and like the video. It is a simple action, but it makes a real difference in whether content like this reaches the people who need it. I will be back with more. Take care of yourselves.